Hello folks! Now last August, the first New England excursion was such an exciting experience, but of course we didn't get to do everything we wanted. One of the most upsetting things about that experience was the fact that we did not get to go to a particular state, one of the power players of New England. After months of thinking to myself, when am I going to be able to go to such a state? We're finally able, on this New England excursion part 2, the sequel, to finally arrive at our 28th state. Welcome to Massachusetts. Now, I don't know about you all, but to me, Massachusetts is a state that I have long anticipated covering here on the Coverage Project. It is a state with such huge amounts of history and culture. But what do you all think when you hear of Massachusetts? What comes to mind with the Bay State? Do you think of the history of Massachusetts not as a state but as a colony? I mean, with 400 years of history, Massachusetts has a lot to tell, from the earliest Puritan separatist settlers, you know, the whole Mayflower story, all the way to, well, this was the state that really birthed the American Revolution. And it seems like today, the people of Massachusetts still hold their fiery angst from the days of the Revolution. I'm only kidding on that, but you could take that for what it's worth. The first thing that may pop into your mind when you think of Massachusetts may just be the story of American Thanksgiving. It was here, nearby actually, not too far from the location we're in today, that the first Thanksgiving that we are taught about happened in Plymouth. The whole Squanto and the Plymouth Rock, and of course all the pilgrims and all that. That's Massachusetts. Well, naturally, you might also think of Boston. It is that huge epicenter of Massachusetts culture. It's also an epicenter of New England culture. You could consider Boston the real capital of New England in a way. Massachusetts is also very widely, nationally known for its huge array of higher education institutions, from Harvard to MIT. Massachusetts is home to not only the oldest, but the most prestigious colleges and universities. Finally, you might think of, well, unfortunately, the bad drivers, but hey, don't take my word for it. The people of Massachusetts take that as a badge of honor. Now, where in Massachusetts are we? Well, in the northeast part of the state, just above the shore above the great city of Boston, lies the old, historic, may I even say spooky, town of Salem. Now, this is a city that was founded all the way back in 1626, just a few years after the Mayflower docked into the Massachusetts Bay. And this is a city known for a wide variety of things, but most notoriously, the Salem Witch Trials of 1692. And so as we travel through Salem, Massachusetts, we will find quite a lot to discover and talk about. So join me today as we venture through this old historic city. Now you're going to notice today, all of these houses and buildings, they are really, really old. So old that some of them show the date on which they were built or the people that lived there. Now you'll probably notice that as we went through downtown, because of Salem's infamous history with the witch trials and the widespread attention it got as this cultural event, in American history. The downtown is laced with all these witch-themed shops. Salem is a huge hub for performing arts of the mystic kind. A lot of mediums and witch practitioners will come here to perform. But aside from the downtown area where you're gonna get more of a commercialized, more marketed experience, we're here for the authentic Salem experience. There are many historic houses here today in Salem which go back to the 17th, 18th centuries, many of which were there during the Salem Witch Trials in 1692. None is more famous than the Jonathan Corwin House. This is the home of Jonathan Corwin, a judge who oversaw many of these Salem Witch Trials. Today, people just call it the Witch House here in Salem. It's a famous place, and there's a gift shop in the back, of course. It's one of those famous places, the spooky places. Ooh, actually, here's another spooky place. I don't know if this also has ties. A nice grand old church, but that Jonathan Corwin house is the only house that had direct ties to the Salem Witch Trials. Oh, I guess this is another one of those old places. This is the first church of Salem. And as the sign saw, 1629. That's also a very, very old date for American history. But yeah, you go around some of the areas, you leave the tourist track of Salem, and you really find the authentic relics that remain here from those old spooky days. I want to be careful today and not romanticize the idea of this whole Salem witch trial stuff. We're here a little bit away from the downtown area in what is called Gallows Hill Park. Yes, that is a dark name. And what stands today as a baseball field, a place where people can have a jovial, innocent, fun time playing baseball. A couple centuries ago, it was not the case at all. It was actually a very, very dark place. Gallows Hill was the place where the accused witches would be hanged at the gallows. I think in order to understand the whole ordeal of what happened here in Salem back in 1692, we really have to understand the people themselves. The Puritans, the separatists who lived here. They were called these Puritan separatists because they wanted to separate from the Church of England. At the time, England, where these settlers came from, they were very strict on religion. Many places around the world were at the time, and the idea of freedom of religion was a relatively new concept. So these Puritans, they wanted to purify their idea of what the Christian religion should be. So that was the whole point of coming to Massachusetts. This Massachusetts Bay was a place where these Puritans could seek a haven, a whole ocean away from England, and have their own idea of what the utopian society was like. But they were kind of hypocrites. They did not like anything that deviated from their ideal of this Puritan religion. These Puritans were very, very conservative with their doctrine. You could almost think of the movie Footloose, but with a lot of 1600s elements, as they banned a lot of fun of any kind. Anything that didn't have to do with glorifying God, they did not like and allow. And so, when suspicion of witchcraft came about in Salem, you could probably tell what these Puritans reacted like. They were not happy at all. In fact, they were frightened, as if these people accused of practicing their witchcraft could be dangerous to the sanctity and continuation of their utopian little society here in Salem. So, on that infamous year of 1692, the town of Salem, they rallied up the community and they made sure to go on a full-scale witch hunt. Well, notice how I'm saying accused witches, because a lot of their witch hunt was very irrational. Any amount of suspicion that was aroused within the community that this person is practicing some sort of witchcraft, well, they were in some hot water If you were unfortunate to suffer at the time in Salem of such things like asthma or epilepsy, or had some sort of psychosis or psychiatric disorder, well, you were a very unfortunate soul. It would be very, very hard for you to escape the mass hysteria surrounding this whole ordeal of the witch hunt that was going on at the time, and just general strange behavior was deemed as practicing the dark arts. If you were convicted of such a crime as they deemed it to be, well, you might be headed for imminent death. One way they would kill you would be to hang you. When we think about it, a lot of the methods that those old Puritans used to detect whether someone was a witch or not are kind of ridiculous. One example I learned in school is that they would tie someone's body to a chair and throw them into a lake where the water would surely cause them to drown. But if they floated, they were a witch, and so they must be lynched. You can see that's just ridiculous because you're headed for death either way, and so very cruel practices back in those times. But yet, about 300 years later, every Halloween or so, there's big parades, big events all year round actually, but it's turned more into a tourist attraction than anything else here in Salem. Look at that Salem clock! Now, for all the things here in the Witch City named after witches and the occult and the dark arts and witchcraft and all of that, I wonder if there are sandwich shops here with the name Sandwiches. That would be funny. You see, what a missed opportunity. Well, this is a pretty nice set of wharves we got here right along the coast of Salem. Yeah, welcome to the Salem Maritime National Historic Site. Salem, Massachusetts is not all about witches and witchcraft and the witch trials. Salem was once one of America's busiest shipping ports. Not anymore, of course, but back in the 1790s or so, a lot of imported goods from around the world. You know, Sumatra and Indonesia, China, India, even the coast of East Africa. A lot of what was imported into America from these areas of the world came onto these docks. You hear the helicopter noise. There's a helicopter that's been stagnant in the air just above the downtown area of Salem for the last 10 minutes now. You know, I came across, coming to this historic site, a sculpture of a witch that was vandalized with red paint. I think I showed a little snippet of that, and I wonder if the helicopter's trying to catch the rogue who vandalized the sculpture with the spray paint. I don't know, that's just a thought. But anyway, isn't this such a beautiful sight of the coast of Salem, Massachusetts, with a ship and a dockhouse? Pretty well preserved. More importantly though, to the scope of Salem's colonial history, this wharf that we were walking along, it's pretty long actually, served as one of the major points of the colonial triangular trade. Now, what's the triangular trade? There were 3 points: northeastern America, the Gulf of Guinea in Africa, and the Caribbean. These 3 points interchanged so many goods all around from one point to another. The area around Salem, you can see these waters. At one point, they harbored a huge amount of fish like cod. And so, you would have cod being exported to the Caribbean and to England even. From the Caribbean, you would have sugar imported. But unfortunately enough, from Africa, yes, slaves were imported to the Americas. Which also means, even though Massachusetts was a colony and later a state that did not really practice slavery on its territory, the Port of Salem did participate a little in the slave trade. But that's not to take away from the pivotal role that Massachusetts and Salem right here contributed to America's colonial history. We can't talk about Massachusetts without mentioning the Massachusetts Bay. This is the feature of geography that laid way towards the development of the colony and later the state of Massachusetts. Gulfs, bays like these were perfect places to have ports because you're inland enough where you can still defend the land very easily rather than just a flat coast. But you can still get wide ships through to and from the port. Yeah, so as a result of this strategically located port, Salem became the 6th largest city in all of the United States. That was in 1790. We're a couple hundred years removed from that, and Salem's just now sort of a suburb city of Boston. Salem, although small today, has contributed a lot to American history because of this wharf's significance. This was the first National Historic Site created. You hear about all these National Historic Sites all across the country, but this was the first. I guess that goes to show you how important this area was. It's said here that Massachusetts is a state of firsts, from the first American university, to the first game of basketball, to the first use of a telephone. All of those are firsts, but quite the contrary could be said here on the Coverage Project, given that Massachusetts is our last New England state to be covered. It's about time we went here, and boy am I glad that our debut was here in Salem. A visit to Salem, just north of Boston, is, I think, a must if you're visiting Massachusetts. Although, given that I couldn't do it last summer, I don't blame you if it's too expensive or it's too inaccessible or the accommodations just don't fit your trip. I get that. However, if you do happen to be lucky enough to make it here, you are in for a grand old treat full of culture and history, and I'm sure the shops that we didn't really cover too much have quite a lot to speak for themselves. For a town that's marred with a horrid dark past, I say it's recovered its reputation quite a lot. Everyone's having a good time. You might actually be able to talk to a witch or two. Seems like this is a spot where all the witches of the world can have a common understanding of one another. No longer afraid of being lynched. So, yeah, that's what I'll say about Salem in Massachusetts. Well, believe it or not, we are almost done with our New England excursion part 2, the sequel. We have one more location, which I will keep a secret. That is going to be our grand finale. Hopefully it works out well tomorrow. So yeah, looking at a picturesque view of the Salem Harbor, a very important harbor in American history. More travels to come. I will see you at the next location.